Hi, boys and girls. This is Mrs. Roach here for our next lesson in science for this week. So, video number 2. So, before we get started, just make sure that you're ready for learning, that you have a quiet space, that you have a pencil and a notebook to write in. Okay. So, we have been learning about objects in space the past week, and today we're going to continue lesson 3 talking about objects in space. Our 2 objectives say, I can support an argument to explain how the force of gravity affects the location of objects in space. I can acquire and use new vocabulary words in context. So we're going to be learning about the objects in space and reading about them in our text and in other sources of information. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to use these are the 3 objects in space that we're going to be talking about today, and we're going to use these when explaining about the objects in space. And so we have asteroid, meteor, comet, and in the last lesson, we talked about an asteroid, and we know that it is one of many small rocky objects between Mars and Jupiter. Oops, sorry about that. And so today we're going to be talking more about meteors and comets as well. And so a meteor, that word should sound familiar to you because Mr. Abbott mentioned it in his lab when he did the craters lab. And so a meteor is a chunk of rock from space that travels through Earth's atmosphere. Okay, and the next object we're going to be learning about is comets. And comets are a mixture of ice, frozen gases, rock, and dust left over from the formation of the solar system. So we're going to be talking about all 3 of these objects today in this lesson. All right, so other objects in space. Let's read this paragraph together. Other than the sun, planets, and moons are the largest objects in the solar system. The next largest objects are dwarf planets. However, many smaller objects are also found in our solar system. So, for example, Pluto is now considered a dwarf planet based on certain factors. So besides dwarf planets, we have smaller objects. And so here is the list of other objects we're going to learn about. Asteroids, we talked about in the last video, which are basically small space rocks. Today we're going to be talking about meteoroids, meteor, meteorite, and comets. Now take a look, pay close attention to these 3 words, okay? Do they look similar? Yes. Okay, if you look at meteoroid and meteorite, they actually have the word meteor in it. And we're going to learn today how they are very much related, okay? Related words. And the next, at the bottom here, we have comets, which we're also going to learn about today. All right, so I just showed you the many different objects we're going to talk about in space. And so we're going to watch this video clip that explains the difference between each of the space objects I just introduced. Okay, so please watch this video.
They're part of action and sci-fi movie plots. We wait out in our backyard to see them showering over Earth. But what's the difference between comets, asteroids, meteoroids, meteors, and meteorites? Let's start with comets. Comets are basically big balls of dust, rock, and metals, surrounded by a thick, icy shell orbiting our sun. And when comets get too close to something hot, like the sun, their ice sublimates, or goes instantly from a solid to a gas. This creates a halo-like glow around the comet, called the coma. And our sun's strong solar winds blow the coma back, giving the comet their infamous tail. Comets can be classified as either long period or short period, depending on whether or not their orbits are longer than 200 years. Comets have highly elliptical orbits, which means they're like a long circle. In fact, some comets can be taken almost completely out of the solar system before they return again. Next are asteroids. Basically, asteroids are just comets without the ice. Just dust, rock, and metal. Most asteroids form in between Mars and Jupiter, in a region called the asteroid belt. While asteroids are rarely directed at Earth, they do pose grave danger to our planet. After all, 65 million years ago, a city-sized asteroid hit near Mexico and caused the dinosaurs to go extinct. Then we have meteoroids. Meteoroids are just pieces of rocky space debris floating around the solar system. Technically, meteoroids are larger than a grain of dust, but smaller than an asteroid. However, most meteoroids are usually only the size of a pebble. Most meteoroids also come from the asteroid belt, but some do come from our moon or even Mars. Next are meteors. Simply put, meteors are just meteoroids that actually hit Earth's atmosphere. We know these better as shooting stars. As a meteor hits our atmosphere, it burns up, causing a big flash of light in the sky. In fact, the term meteor from ancient Greece literally means celestial phenomenon in the heavens above, which refers directly to the flash of light itself. Even though they appear as big shooting stars, meteors are actually only the size of pebbles. Last but not least, meteorites. A meteorite is simply a meteoroid that successfully makes it through Earth's atmosphere and hits the Earth's surface. Meteorites are dangerous simply because they're too small to be detected. They come without a warning. And even though meteorites are usually very small, around the size of a pebble, they're still very dangerous because they travel at high velocities. Fortunately, it's very rare for a meteoroid to actually make it through Earth's thick atmosphere. Thanks, Earth! For more awesome videos about our universe, subscribe, comment.
Okay, so let's recap what we learned on the video. So what is the difference between a meteor, a meteoroid, and a meteorite? Well, we're going to take a look at this website. This is a website from NASA, and it has some really great information about objects in space. So we're going to take a look and just review what we learned on the video between the difference between the three. So let's read this together. It says they're all related to the flashes of light called shooting stars, sometimes seen striking across the sky, but we call the same object by different names depending on where it is. So the location of the object is how it gets its name. So let's look a little bit more closely. It says meteoroids are objects in space that range in size from a dust grain to small asteroids, okay? And we think of them as space rocks, all right? So they're out there just kind of floating in the sky, in the solar system. So when meteoroids enter Earth's atmosphere or that of another planet like Mars at high speed and then they burn up, the fireballs or shooting stars are called meteors, okay? And so sometimes the meteoroids enter the atmosphere near other planets, and we might see them as looking like shooting stars in the sky, okay? Those are called meteors once they get closer and they're in the atmosphere. However, when a meteoroid survives the trip through the atmosphere and hits the ground or the surface, then it's called a meteorite. And so this is highly more unlikely than a meteoroid. A meteorite very rarely happens where it has that impact on either, say, Earth or another planet or the moon. But here is a picture of a small, some kind of small meteorite that hit in Antarctica. And so the scientists are kind of analyzing it and studying it. And so again, it's more unlikely for it to become a meteorite. And so to summarize what we learned between the difference between the three, okay? Basically, a meteoroid is a small rocky or metallic object that orbits the sun. A meteor is the same as a meteoroid if and when it comes close enough and enters Earth's atmosphere. When a meteoroid evaporates, it becomes a meteor. And if the meteor hits Earth's surface, it is then a meteorite. Okay? And so, just a fun fact, many meteoroids are no bigger than a grain of sand. So if you can, picture that, it's very small, very tiny. They can be very tiny. All right. And so I explained how it's, very rare that it will become a meteorite, meaning it will come into contact. But about 50,000 years ago, so if you look here, this is a meteorite that basically caused this crater in Earth's surface, and this happened in Arizona. And we shared this with you last week too, Mr. Abbott did in his lab. So 50,000 years ago, a meteorite hit Earth, causing a crater in the surface. And so as you can see down here, here's the crater that it formed. And so this was a very large crater that it formed. It was about 11 football fields long. So think about that. And so here is a picture of another meteorite that happened to hit. So again, very unlikely, but small chance of it becoming a meteorite. All right. The next object in space we're going to talk about is comets. Okay. And so boys and girls, if you were paying attention during the video, what's the difference between a comet versus an asteroid? They are very similar except for one factor. Yeah, so a comet is covered in ice, okay, and an asteroid is not. And so that is the difference between the two. Besides that, they have very similar factors. They're made of dust and rock. And so let's read about comets. It says a comet is a mixture of frozen gases, ice, dust, and rock that moves in an elliptical orbit around the sun. Comets are thought to be bits of material left over from the formation of the solar system about 4.6 billion years ago. That is a very, very long time. Very long time ago that they believe it to have formed the solar system. When a comet is farther away from the sun, the gases and ice in the comet are frozen. As the comet moves toward the sun, the core or nucleus of the comet warms up. Some of the ice and the dust in the nucleus form a cloud or coma around the nucleus. Together, the coma and the nucleus make up the head of the comet. So if you take a look right here, boys and girls, here's your diagram. Here's the comet orbiting the sun and its tail behind it. And so let's kind of recap. What is a comet? Yes, it's a mixture of frozen gases, ice, dust, and rock that moves in an elliptical orbit around the sun. Very good. So what happens to a comet as it gets closer to the sun? Well, let's read to find out. It says, as the comet gets closer to the sun, heat from the sun's rays pushes some of the coma away from the comet. This material forms a glowing tail that may stretch millions of kilometers behind the head. Sometimes two tails will form. One tail is made of ice, and one is made of gases. So if you look down here, here is that tail they're talking about, and it says, the caption says, comets have tails of ice and gases. And it says heat moves out from the sun in every direction. As a comet moves around the sun, the head stays closest to the sun and the tail trails behind it. No matter where the comet is in its path around the sun, the comet's tail will always point away from the sun. And so here is a picture of what, I'll show you the picture next. So let's answer this question first from what we read. What happens to a comet as it gets closer to the sun? So comets orbit the sun like asteroids, but comets are made of dust, some rock, metal, and they're covered in ice. And as a comet's orbit takes it toward the sun, the ice and dust begin to vaporize. That vaporized ice and dust become the comet's tail. you can see a comet even when it is very far from Earth. However, when you see a meteor, it's in our atmosphere. And so let's take a look at a picture that an observer took. Here's a picture of a real comet in the night sky. And you can definitely see here, if you look right here, you can kind of see the two tails that we just read about. And so there is a picture of a comet. All right. And so the closer it gets to the sun, the tail that you see is a result of it vaporizing. Okay. And that's when you see that cloud of bright light. Okay. So let's kind of compare what we've learned about meteors, and comets. So we know comets are very similar to asteroids, except they are covered in ice. They're surrounded in ice, right? And so meteors, we learned that depending on their location, they're called different things. And when they hit, they are meteorites, just to review what we've read so far. And so how are meteors and comets, how are they similar? What do they have in common? Well, they're both space objects that are visible in the night sky. So meteors can be seen, they look like falling stars or during a meteor shower. And then comets, I just showed you the picture of the comet in the night sky. You can see its tail behind it. And so what are meteors? Let's review. What are meteors? They are rocky or metallic and usually small, and they can enter Earth's atmosphere. What are comets? Let's review. Frozen gas, dust, and ice, and they orbit the sun. Very good. All right, we have learned about all the different objects in space. Now we're going to read and find out some more information about these objects. And so, boys and girls, what I did is I included some websites that I found some more information on space objects on. And so we can also find more information in our science handbook, but there's also some really great websites and sources of information that you can, do research on a topic if you want to know more about that topic and just learn more in-depth material about it. And so we're going to answer some questions from our Be a Scientist notebook. And I found the answers just using some website resources, doing some research online. So here is an example. So here's the first research question that I looked up. In what areas do comets originate? And so what I did was I did some research. I typed it into my search engine and I found a website source. So I included my source of where I found the information. And when I got to the website, after I was done reading it, I was able to answer my question about where comets originated from. And so in these first two paragraphs, I was able to find that they come from two different places. One of those places is from the Oort cloud, which is named after an astronomer who discovered the location. And then I also read on and found that the second location of where they originated from is past Neptune, and it's called the Kuiper Belt. And so those two places, it answers my question, my research question, where do they originate? So comets originate in the outer solar system, beyond Neptune, in the Kuiper Belt, and the Oort cloud. And so here is another question that I found some more information about the space objects. Whoops, let me pull up the question first. That would be helpful. Nope. Where's my question? There we go. Name 4 of the largest asteroids. So again, I typed my question or topic into the search engine, and then I found this website, solarstory.net. And, I scanned through it and I found the list of the largest asteroids that are known to date that have been discovered. And so I scrolled through until I found 4 of the largest asteroids that exist. And so that was a great website for me to include. And so here we have Ceres, Juno, Pallas, and Vesta were the 4 largest asteroids that I did my research and found out. And so there's some really great website resources out there if you decide to do some of your own research, which is optional, on any of the topics that we've been learning about. All right, we have one more research question. And so it keeps doing that. All right, here is our last research question. How do the movements of comets, meteors, and asteroids compare to the movements of the planets? And so for this question, I found my answer on NASA's website, the solar system. And so I thought this was a great website. And it had a lot of information. So if you want to check it out on your own time. And so after reading through, I was able to summarize and find my answer. And so how do the movements of comets, meteors, and asteroids compare to the movements of the planets? And here is my answer that I summarized. That I summarized through my research. So here it says, everything in the solar system orbits the sun. Most asteroids orbit the sun just as planets do, in nearly circular orbits. Other asteroids are more elliptical. Comets have extremely elliptical orbits. Meteors orbits cross Earth's orbit and enter the atmosphere. Okay? So those were just some examples, boys and girls, of some independent research that I did. And so this is totally optional if you would like to pause and write down any of these questions, research questions, if you'd like to do some independent research on your own, if you are interested in this topic. And there's a lot of great information out there. So again, this is optional. If you'd like to, you could always share with your teacher if you do the research and you find some information. All right. Well, that wraps up lesson 3, boys and girls, about objects in space. And so here is our page, Keely. We're going to return to this and we're going to see if we need to adjust our thinking or if we are maybe better able to justify our thinking after learning what we learned. And so in the beginning of the lesson, I asked you to pick who you agree with, Angie, Tamara, Carlos, or Mei Ling. And so now we're going to see who's thinking we should have agreed with the most. And now we can adjust our thinking if we need to. And so Carlos was on the right track. He said, I think Earth's gravity pulls on things close to the Earth, including some things in space. And so even you may have maybe been able to, you agreed with Carlos, but weren't really sure how to justify your answer. So let's take a look at an example of an explanation for why Carlos is correct in his thinking. And so it says objects on or near Earth, including objects in space, such as our moon, satellites, and meteors, are pulled toward Earth due to gravitational attraction of Earth, which is a large mass that attracts nearby objects of smaller mass. And so basically, boys and girls, basically objects are orbiting around the sun, right? And gravity and inertia are kind of holding everything together in place. The objects are kind of playing this tug of war. They want to go forward, but the planets nearby are kind of pulling it in, that force of gravity. And so if the movement of the objects or the force of inertia, if it is weaker than the pull of gravity, an object can basically be pulled in or it can crash into another planet. And so this is, very unlikely for planet Earth that a object would crash into it, and that's because of our thick atmosphere. But there has been objects that have impacted Earth in the past and have, impacted other planets and the moon. So, all right. And so that wraps up everything we need to learn about space, objects in space. And so what other objects can be found in space? Well, here are all the objects we've been learning about the past couple weeks. Planets, asteroids, meteors, comets, satellites, the moon, which is a natural satellite, and spacecraft. And everything orbits the sun, boys and girls. All right. We are all wrapped up with lesson 3. And so here is just our next science of the week, joke of the week. It says, how do you organize a space party? Well, you plan it. There you go. All right. Make sure you do assignment 14, which is also on objects in space. And then I will see you boys and girls next week. We'll move on to our next lesson. Bye-bye. Take care.